really, really interesting. We're going to jump to the other end of the spectrum. We're going to go very far away from development, although I really liked what Paul has drawn up there. So we're going to look at CSDM. And by the way, if you're wondering why I have this background, it's because without the background, everything looks like this. The beauty of home office, in our case, working from a bit of a logistical nightmare. So I'm using a background. It's beautiful. Anyway, CSDM. Let's go on with that. So I have a bit of a set of articles going, which is called "Why Is It Modeled Like That?" Because I noticed that CSDM very often gets very complex and unnecessarily complicated. So what I want to talk about today is essentially an efficient approach to CSDM and kind of giving you a starting point or a restarting point on how to move forward and address CSDM in a way that could help you out. But let's start off with just quickly what CSDM is. So CSDM is a standard and consistent set of terms and definitions for all ServiceNow products on the platform. This is an important thing to understand. When we talk about CSDM, it's not about a badge. It's not about some form of kind of old circle of people agreeing to something and this is now the law. It's about a set of terms and definitions that we keep the same and consistent across any ServiceNow product. It also means that if you are not following CSDM, which you can, by the way, there is no policing entity to go out and run after customers who are not using CSDM. But if you aren't using CSDM, you are assuming that you know better, and assumptions kill. This is very important. I'm not talking from a perspective of, I know better. I have learned that I don't. I have had several engagements and also implementations further back in the past that I was able to learn from. And the assumption that we can just ignore CSDM or that we can do some parts differently is an assumption that can have a butterfly effect down the road. So really understand that, yes, you don't need to follow CSDM. You can disagree with CSDM. For a matter of fact, I do disagree with some parts of CSDM as well, but it's assuming that I know better in the overall project portfolio and in the overall platform of ServiceNow. And I rather assume that I don't know better, so I'm sticking to CSDM. And by the way, when I'm talking about that, I'm a person who has done OT in CSDM before the OT modules have been alive. I've put application services that were literal metal presses into the CMDB and ships and trains before that has become its own class. So I have abused this data model and I still don't know everything. I still have to assume that I don't know better and just stick with it. So today, we're going to look at CSDM from the perspective of not knowing better, because that's the best kind of assumption that we can make. And this is also the approach that I want to pitch. I want to go away from a kind of medal race to, hey, who has the better maturity in CSDM? I want to pitch an approach that's basically a development approach, coming back to developers again, which is keep it simple, stupid. It's an approach where we start with a simple but accurate model and then make it more complex if we need to and whenever we need to, while sticking to the consistency and standardization that CSDM has to offer. It essentially operates under the premise that CSDM first has to fit your use case, and then maturity will follow. We can't start with maturity and then hopefully everything we need it for actually fits in. And I want to give you an example on that with the ServiceNow platform. So let's assume you are starting a greenfield approach and you use ServiceNow. So ServiceNow as a service has to be modeled in CSDM in your ServiceNow CMDB. This is likely the most simple variation of using most of the quadrants or most of the modeling domains, while keeping the model as simple as possible. We know we have mid-service. We know we have a ServiceNow instance, at least one. You probably have at least two in reality. We have a business application for the ServiceNow platform. We have a business service offering, service management, that we use the ServiceNow instance for. And we have at least one team that generally supports our service instance. So we have a technology management offering and a technology management service. This is as simple as it gets. And for some, especially smaller customers, this is enough. Why? If I have a problem with service management, I, as an end user, can create an incident on service management, on that business service offering. And then someone from the TMO platform support picks up that incident because it's linked through our service instance platform. We only need to make it more complex for two reasons. And the first reason is added functionality. If we add functionality to a CSDM modeling of a platform, what happens is with new functionality comes independent failure and independent reaction times. So in this case, we have ITOM and ITSM. And ITOM can fail independently from ITSM because, and I hope you follow that best practice, if you don't, please do, you have a separate mid server for your ITOM integrations and for discovery. So you have at least two mid servers now. And both, again, depend on your service instance platform. Because we have that added functionality that can fail independently and that's not always available to the same user group, you could even argue that we need a second business service offering. This is, again, linked to our functionality in this case. If we have functionality that's available to different user groups, then we need more business service offerings available to the different groups. In this example, we still have one platform team that just supports everything. Awesome, we don't need to add more technology management offerings. So our first argument to make a model in CSDM more complex is by adding identified functionality under the premise, and this is the question I like to use when going through this with different teams, can it fail independently? And if it fails independently, do you react differently to it? This is important. Sometimes stuff can fail independently, but you don't care that it failed independently. You react the same way. But as soon as you react differently, different SLAs, different time groups, stuff like that, we make the model more complex. And this goes hand in hand then with ownership across our business. Now, when we go further into the business application modeling and the design behind that, what we have is a documentation of ownership, which means that from a business application perspective, we only need to split up business applications, not when we have more functionality, but if that functionality runs under separate ownership. This ownership can be on the business level. Business level ownership usually answers to the question on who pays for it, or if we get sued, who gets sued. And then we may have different product owners, right? So for ITOM and ITSM, you may have two different people that are responsible for continuously developing and moving forward the product. So now you have two different business application records. If that's the same person, we can go back to this. If it's the same team, we can stick to that. Just because you saw a screenshot of something very complex doesn't mean you have to do that. The reason why we want to stick with a simple approach is every time we add new objects to this model, we need to maintain them. And this is one of the important topics where I see a lot of customers and users in the CMDB struggle is we need ownership, because without ownership, there's no governance, and without governance, there's no longevity. So whenever you add a simple box, whenever you add one of these colorful, fun boxes, someone needs to keep that up to date. I've been in like engagements with banks where the person responsible for a business application, who was the business application owner, didn't work at the company since the last 2 years. That's dangerous because if at that time they would have a DORA audit, that would have been flagged. which isn't great for banks, by the way, right? So the idea is we want to keep as simple as possible kind of setup within CSDM while making sure that it works with the processes, with your use cases. And then we want to make sure that ownership is taken not from the CMDB team, but from the people who are owners of these boxes. So my product owner for ITOM, he's responsible for keeping that box where it says business application ITOM up to date. My platform owner for the ServiceNow production instance, he's responsible for keeping that record ServiceNow instance platform up to date. The team lead of the ServiceNow support team is responsible for making sure that the TMS and the TMOs are up to date. Our business service owner is responsible for keeping the business service and the business service offerings up to date. And a core rule of thumb that I like to introduce is your responsibility, one level down, meaning that our platform owner for ServiceNow instance platform, they need to maintain their responsibility, and then the relationship one step down. So in this case, towards the mid server. They are not responsible for creating the mid server. They are just there to make sure that that relationship is there. And this is then a three-pillar approach. The first part of this pillar approach is training and governance. You want to make sure that every owner understands their scope and is trained in their scope and understands the impact that that scope has, right? They will understand and need to understand that it's not an additional task. It's not something they need to do on top, but it's actually a part core of their day-to-day work because it's core to the business, right? It's important that we have all the business application owners, because if we do not have them documented, a DORA audit will basically mean we go out of business, right? So be very straight with that kind of relationship and make that transparent in the training and governance. But also understand in training and governance, not everyone needs to understand the full scope of CSDM. We want to start simple, and then we want to expand on a use case to use case basis. And to ensure that kind of longevity, I want to leave you with something that Germans really dislike, which is way too short governance weeklies. 50 minutes tops. Get together the core pieces of your owners and identify a scalable, achievable, and remediative action. Just one. Start off with one. You will have a list of like 25. Just one is good enough. Why? Because you can actually achieve one remediative action in a week, and you're going to meet next week anyways. So stick to 15 minutes, and then you are able to basically get better every single week. What you need to do beforehand is make sure that the owners are onboarded to the idea, not just CSDM. And what you want to approach this by is starting off simple, then adding complexity with understanding that if I don't have an owner for a box, it's going to be outdated very quickly. CSDM is an effort not by a CMDB team, not by a central person. It's an effort by the whole company. Everybody needs to chip in a bit. And then everybody has 5 more minutes, but it's manageable because it's spread out. A lot of talking, and I see that my time is already up. So I'm going to try to go through some of these questions afterwards and give you a written answer to it. Thank you for listening in. Feel free to check out the article series of Why Is It Modeled Like That, where I go through specific examples on why certain things are modeled in CSDM. And enjoy the next sessions, which are going to be super interesting. I checked them out, and I think I'm going to stick around for a while here.